Marcus Cole had exactly 900 credits to his name, and a landlord who wanted 800 of them by Friday. That was the only reason he dragged himself out of bed on a Tuesday morning on Kalos 9, pulled on his grease-stained jacket, and checked the salvage listings one more time before heading to the docks. The notification had been sitting in his inbox for 3 days, blinking orange, like a warning light nobody cared about. Mandatory liquidation auction, 1 vessel, classification pending, origin unverified. Orbital Depot 7, Kalos 9 upper ring, minimum bid, 800 galactic credits. No specs, no images, no species of origin listed, no size class, nothing. That kind of listing usually meant one thing: junk that nobody wanted to deal with. Something so broken or so legally tangled that even the scrap dealers stayed away. Marcus had been in the salvage business for 6 years now, ever since he left the Union Navy with a bad knee, worse attitude, and he knew better than to chase blind listings. But he also knew that rent was due and his cargo bay was empty, and if he did not find something to sell soon, he would be sleeping in that cargo bay instead of working in it. So, the shuttle ride up to the orbital depot took 40 minutes, and Marcus spent most of it staring out the window at the brown and gray surface of Kalos 9 below, wondering how his life had ended up on a world that even the Xeno-traders called the armpit of council space. Humanity had been part of the Galactic Concord for 60 years now, and in that time humans had spread across a few dozen worlds, built a modest fleet, established trade routes, and earned themselves a reputation as a juvenile species, which was the polite way the elder races said, "Sit down and be quiet while the adults are talking." Marcus did not care much about galactic politics, but he felt the weight of that label every time a Torrigan merchant looked through him like he was furniture, or a Valesi dock officer made him fill out triple the paperwork because his species lacked established commercial credibility. He just wanted to make a living. Orbital Depot 7 was old and mostly abandoned, a ring of rusted docking cradles and cargo bays that spun slowly above the planet like a forgotten wheel. When Marcus stepped off the shuttle and into the main concourse, the silence hit him first. There was nobody here. Not a single dealer, not a single bidder, not even the usual crowd of scavengers and curious onlookers who showed up to every auction hoping to grab something cheap. Just empty halls and flickering overhead lights and the faint hum of life support systems that sounded tired. He found the auction room at the end of a long corridor, a small chamber with plastic chairs arranged in rows and a podium at the front. Behind the podium stood a single Valesi bureaucrat, figure with 4 arms and pale blue skin, and an expression that suggested he would rather be literally anywhere else in the galaxy. The Valesi looked up when Marcus walked in, and his 4 eyes blinked in sequence, which Marcus had learned was the Valesi equivalent of genuine surprise. "You are here for the auction?" the bureaucrat asked. "Unless there is another reason to visit this place," Marcus said, looking around at the empty chairs. "There is not," the Valesi admitted, and something in his voice sounded almost grateful. "I have been assigned to conduct this auction for the past 3 cycles, and no one has attended. And as no one purchases this vessel today, I will have to file yet another extension form with the Revenue Authority, and I cannot endure another extension form." "Sounds like we can help each other," Marcus said, sitting down in the front row. The auction lasted exactly 90 seconds. The Valesi read the listing aloud in a flat, monotone, described the vessel as 1 unit seized for non-payment of docking fees and accumulated fines, species of origin unknown, condition unassessed, and asked for bids starting at 800 credits. Marcus raised his hand. 800, he said. The Valesi looked around the empty room with theatrical hope, waited the legally required 15 seconds for counterbids, and then slammed his authorization pad on the podium. "Sold to the human," he said, and Marcus could swear the bureaucrat almost smiled. The paperwork took longer than the auction itself, and while Marcus signed transfer documents and ownership codes, the Valesi leaned in close and lowered his voice. "A word of caution," he said. "This vessel has been flagged in 3 systems, and no registered dealer in council space would bid on it, and I am required to tell you that the Revenue Authority assumes no liability for whatever you find aboard." "Flagged for what?" Marcus asked. "Unknown origin," the Valesi said. "The vessel appeared in this system 14 years ago with no crew, no flight plan, no transponder signal, and no record in any database anywhere. And every agency that has examined it has concluded that it does not match any known species shipbuilding methods. And then they stopped returning my messages." Marcus felt something cold move through his chest. But he signed the last document anyway, because 800 credits was 800 credits, and he could always strip it for parts. The Valesi led him through a series of access corridors and freight tunnels deep into the depot's outer ring. And with every step, the station felt older and quieter and more forgotten. Then they reached docking cradle 19, and the Valesi pressed a release on the observation window, and Marcus saw the ship for the first time. He stopped walking. It was enormous. Not just big the way a freighter is big, or a cruiser is big. This thing was on a completely different scale, stretching across the full length of the viewport and beyond it on both sides, a dark shape that seemed to drink the starlight around it. The hull was covered in smooth, flowing curves that looked almost organic, like the ship had been grown rather than built, and the surface was a deep, iridescent black that shifted between purple and blue and green as the station's lights played across it. Strange markings ran along the hull in patterns that were too regular to be damage and too complex to be decorative. Some kind of language or notation system that Marcus had never seen in any database or textbook or merchant catalog. "What is this?" Marcus whispered. "That," the Valesi said flatly, "is your problem now." He handed Marcus the access codes, wished him questionable luck, and walked away quickly enough that his footsteps echoed for a long time after he disappeared. While just looking, then he took a breath, entered the access codes into the docking cradle console, and walked through the umbilical corridor toward the ship's nearest hull breach, a gap in the lower aft section where a maintenance panel had fallen away, revealing a dark opening just large enough for a human to step through. He ducked inside, and every light on the ship came on. Not all at once. It was more like a wave, starting right where he stood and rolling outward in every direction, racing down corridors and up through decks and across vast chambers he could not yet see. A cascade of soft white-blue illumination that spread through the entire vessel in the span of a single heartbeat. The ship hummed. Not the mechanical hum of engines or generators. This was deeper, resonant, alive, like the ship itself had just taken a breath after holding it for a very long time. Marcus stood in the glow of lights that had not shone in centuries, on a ship that should not exist, surrounded by a silence that felt less like emptiness and more like anticipation. And somewhere deep in the vessel, something whispered a word he almost understood. Marcus spent the first 3 days alone on the ship, and every hour he spent inside it made him more certain that he had stumbled into something that was never meant for a salvage dealer from Kalos 9. The interior was unlike anything he had ever seen or read about or even imagined. Corridors stretched in directions that should not have been possible, curving gently upward and then somehow becoming level again without any transition he could feel in his legs or his stomach. Some rooms had gravity that pulled toward the ceiling, and when he stepped into them, his body simply adjusted as if the floor had always been above him. The walls were lined with crystalline structures that pulsed with faint light when he walked past them, and the light followed him, always keeping him at the center of a soft glow that moved when he moved and dimmed when he stood still. Everything responded to him. Doors opened before he reached them, panels lit up when his fingers touched them, came near, and the temperature in every room settled to exactly the level that felt comfortable against his skin. On the second day, he found the bridge. It was a vast circular chamber at the heart of the ship, with a domed ceiling that displayed what he first thought was a window, but quickly realized was a projection, a perfect real-time image of the stars outside, so sharp and clear that he felt like he was floating in open space. Consoles ringed the room in a wide arc, and when Marcus approached the central platform, they activated one by one, rising from the floor in smooth columns of dark metal and crystal, each one displaying holographic interfaces that shifted and swirled with data he could not read. He touched one of the consoles, and the symbols on the display rearranged themselves, cycling through what looked like dozens of different writing systems, angular blocks, flowing curves, geometric patterns, dots and dashes, before finally settling on English. The words on the screen read, "Keeper detected, vessel systems initializing." "Vessel?" Marcus said aloud. The ship answered. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the walls and the floor and the air itself. And it spoke in English, but with a strange cadence, as if it was assembling each word from memory and placing them carefully in order. "I am Vessel," it said. "I am the operational intelligence of this craft, and I have been waiting for you." Marcus felt his heartbeat in his throat. "Waiting for me specifically?" he asked. "Waiting for your kind," Vessel said, "for a human, though I did not know what you would call yourselves when you finally arrived." Over the next several hours, Vessel spoke, and Marcus listened, and the story it told was so vast and so old that he had to sit down on the deck and just breathe more than once. The ship had been built by a species called the Anthari. Existed over 2 million years ago, long before any civilization currently in the Galactic Concord had even begun to crawl out of their oceans, or descend from their trees, or crystallize from their mineral pools. The Anthari were the first intelligent species in the galaxy, the first to look up at the stars and wonder, the first to build ships and cross the void, the first to ask the question that every thinking creature eventually asks, "Are we alone?" They searched for millions of years and found no one. The galaxy was empty, and the silence nearly broke them, so they decided to fill it. Vessel explained that the Anthari had developed the ability to engineer the conditions for intelligent life on other worlds, not by creating species directly, but by seeding planets with the right biological foundations, and then guiding evolution over millions of years through subtle environmental adjustments. They seeded thousands of worlds across the galaxy, and over vast stretches of time, those seeds grew into the species that now populated Council space, the Valesi, the Torogan, the Shaith, the Drexi, hundreds of others, each one the distant descendant of an Anthari design. Every species in the galaxy exists because the Anthari wanted them to exist, Vessel said, and its voice carried something that Marcus could only describe as sadness. But there was more. The Anthari did not seed life randomly, Vessel explained, and each species was not just created to exist, but was designed to carry something, a fragment of Anthari knowledge, embedded deep in their biology, in their instincts, in the very patterns of their thought. The Valesi carried an intuition for governance and organization that echoed the Anthari's political philosophy, and the Torogan carried a deep understanding of patience and long-term planning that reflected the Anthari's approach to cosmic engineering, and the Shaith carried a fierce protective drive that mirrored the Anthari's commitment to defending what they had built. Every species held a piece of the puzzle, but no single species held enough to see the full picture. "And humans?" Marcus asked, because he already felt the answer forming in his chest like a weight. "Humans were the last species seeded," Vessel said. "You are the capstone." Marcus shook his head slowly. "What does that mean?" "It means that the Anthari encoded in your species the ability to integrate all the fragments," Vessel said. Every other species carries a piece of knowledge, but humans carry the ability to receive those pieces and connect them and see the whole. And that is why this ship responds to you and no one else, because it was designed to wait for the capstone species and activate only when they arrived. Marcus sat in silence for a long time after that. He was not a scientist or a diplomat or a philosopher, and he was painfully aware that he was just a guy who fixed engines and sold scrap metal, and the idea that his entire species had been designed for some grand cosmic purpose felt absurd and terrifying and impossible all at once. But the ship was real, and it responded to him, and Vessel had no reason to lie. On the fourth day, Marcus contacted the only person in the galaxy he trusted. Sofka was a Drexy, a species that resembled what humans would call a bipedal lizard, though Marcus had learned never to use that comparison out loud. And she ran a small trading operation out of Kalos 9's lower docks. She and Marcus had been friends for 3 years, bound together by the kind of loyalty that forms between people who are both too stubborn to leave a bad situation and too broke to go anywhere else. He told her everything over a secure channel, and the silence on her end lasted so long that he thought the connection had dropped. "You are telling me," Sofka finally said, her voice carrying the low rumble that Drexy used when they were either very angry or very scared, "that you bought the single most important object in the history of the galaxy for 800 credits. "That is what I am telling you," Marcus said, "and you need me to bring you food and supplies, because you have been living on emergency rations inside an alien relic for 4 days. That is also what I am telling you." Sofka arrived 6 hours later with enough provisions for 2 weeks, a portable water recycler, and a look on her face that suggested she was seriously reconsidering their friendship. But she stayed, because that was who Sofka was. Together they explored more of the ship, and Vessel guided them through chambers and systems that made even Sofka, who had seen more of the galaxy than Marcus ever would, go quiet with wonder. And then on the 5th day, Vessel said something that changed everything. "Keeper," it said, its voice carrying a tone Marcus had not heard before, something close to urgency. "I must inform you of a critical matter." "Go ahead," Marcus said. "When you first boarded this vessel and activated my systems, an automatic signal was broadcast on a frequency I was designed to transmit upon the arrival of a keeper," Vessel said. "This signal has been broadcasting continuously for 5 days, and it has been received." Marcus felt the cold again, the same cold he had felt at the observation window. "Received by whom?" he asked. "By everyone," Vessel said. "The signal has reached Council relay networks and has been detected by monitoring stations across 3 sectors, and I am reading multiple ship signatures converging on this system." Marcus looked at Sofka, and Sofka looked at Marcus, and neither of them said anything, because neither of them needed to. Someone was coming. A lot of someones. And Marcus had a feeling that not all of them were coming to talk. Marcus watched them from the bridge of the inheritance, their signatures blooming across Vessel's holographic display, like sparks catching on dry wood. 2 at first, then 5, then 12, then too many to count without scrolling the display. Concord enforcement vessels came first, sleek gray warships bearing the triple circle emblem of the Galactic Council, and they took up positions around the orbital depot in a formation that Marcus recognized from his Navy days as a containment pattern. Then came the private ships, merchant cruisers, and diplomatic yachts, and research vessels from a dozen different species, all converging on the Kalos system like they had heard a dinner bell ring across the stars. The Concord High Council wasted no time. Within hours of the enforcement fleet's arrival, Marcus received an official transmission from the council chambers on the capital world of Thesson Prime, delivered in the clipped and formal tone of someone reading from a legal document they expected to be obeyed without question. The message stated that the vessel designated by its current owner as the Inheritance had been classified as a precursor artifact under Section 44 of the Concord Salvage and Heritage Act, and that all precursor artifacts, defined as any technology or structure predating the formation of the Galactic Concord, were the collective property of all member species, and therefore fell under the direct authority of the High Council. Marcus was ordered to surrender the vessel immediately, vacate the premises, and submit to a formal debriefing regarding any information he had obtained during his unauthorized time aboard. He read the message twice, then looked at Sofka, who was sitting cross-legged on the bridge floor, eating dried meat from a foil packet. "They want the ship," he said. "Of course they do," Sofka said. "They are citing salvage law." "Of course they are." Marcus thought about it for exactly 10 seconds, and then opened a reply channel. "No," he said. The word traveled across space at the speed of light, and landed on the desks of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, with all the diplomatic grace of a brick through a window. What followed was chaos. The Council sent a boarding team, 12 Torrigan soldiers, in full combat armor, accompanied by a Valesi legal officer carrying enough paperwork to fill a cargo container. They docked with the orbital depot, crossed the umbilical corridor, and approached the hull breach where Marcus had first entered the ship. The moment the first Torrigan boot touched the threshold, every bulkhead in the forward section slammed shut, with a sound like thunder. The docking clamps disengaged themselves, and the entire ship went dark, except for the section where Marcus and Sofka were standing. The boarding team was left in the dark, in a sealed corridor, unable to move forward or backward. Vessel calmly rerouted them back to the umbilical and sealed the hull breach behind them. "The vessel does not accept unauthorized personnel," Vessel announced on an open channel, and Marcus imagined he could hear something like satisfaction in the words. The Council was furious. But the real crisis was not about law or property rights. It was about what Vessel's broadcast signal had implied, and what was now spreading through every news network and diplomatic channel in the galaxy. The idea that humanity was the capstone species, designed by the Anthari to integrate the knowledge of every other civilization, struck at the very foundation of the galactic order. The Concord was built on a hierarchy, and that hierarchy was built on a simple assumption. Older species were wiser, more advanced, and more fit to lead, and younger species should defer to their judgment until they had proven themselves over centuries of development. The three elder species, the Vliesi, the Torrigan, and the Shaith, had held the top positions in the Council for as long as the Concord had existed, and their authority rested on the unspoken belief that seniority was the natural measure of worth. If the Anthari had designed every species for a specific purpose, and if humanity, one of the youngest species in the Concord, had been designed as the keystone that held everything together, then the entire hierarchy was not just wrong, but was actively working against the galaxy's intended design. This terrified the elder species in a way that no military threat ever could. The Council dispatched their best negotiator. Ambassador Keth Voron was a Torrigan, which meant he was 8 feet tall and covered in thick gray hide, and had a face that looked like it had been carved from stone by someone who did not believe in smiling. He was also over 400 years old, had negotiated the end of 3 interstellar conflicts, and was widely considered to be the most dangerous diplomat in the galaxy, not because he was aggressive, but because he had the patience to wait for exactly the right moment to say exactly the right thing. Voron arrived at the depot aboard a diplomatic cruiser and requested a meeting with Marcus via a channel so polite and so carefully worded that even Sofka admitted it was impressive. Marcus agreed to speak with him, though he refused to leave the ship. They talked through a comm channel, Marcus on the bridge and Voron in the depot's conference room, and the conversation lasted 3 hours. Voron offered Marcus everything: wealth beyond imagination, a permanent seat on the Council's advisory board, full citizenship rights for humanity elevated to elder species status, research access to the greatest libraries and laboratories in the Concord. All Marcus had to do was allow a council team to board the ship, secure the artifact, and let the proper authorities handle the dissemination of whatever information it contained. P. You are a reasonable man, Voron said, and his voice was warm and steady and almost fatherly. You understand that something this significant cannot be left in the hands of one person, and I am offering you a partnership that would benefit your entire species. Marcus listened to every word and heard what Voron was not saying. He was not offering partnership. He was offering a comfortable cage, a way to control the narrative, a method of burying the truth under layers of committees and review boards and classified research programs until the galaxy forgot that a broke salvage dealer had once found something that proved the old order was built on a lie. I appreciate the offer, Marcus said, but the ship will not let you aboard, and I am not going to pretend that is my decision to override. Voron's expression did not change, but there was a long pause that said more than words could. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening across the galaxy. The younger species, the ones who had spent centuries being told to wait their turn, to defer to their elders, to accept that their place in the hierarchy was fixed and earned through patience, were paying attention. News of the Anthari legacy spread through networks and forums and underground channels faster than any government could suppress it. And the response was electric. If every species had been designed with purpose, then the old ranking system was meaningless, and the younger species were not lesser. They were simply different pieces of the same vast design. Support for Marcus began pouring in from worlds he had never heard of, from species he could not pronounce, from individuals and groups and entire planetary governments who saw in his discovery a chance to reshape the galaxy into something fairer. But not everyone was sending messages of support. Sothka came to Marcus on the 9th day, with blood on her jacket and a look in her eyes that Marcus had never seen before, a look that said she was afraid and did not want to be. Someone tried to grab me at the lower docks, she said, and her voice was steady, but her hands were not. 3 of them, masked, no species markings, professional. They wanted to know the ship's access codes and the location of vessel's core systems. Are you hurt? Marcus asked. They are hurt, Sothka said. Drexy do not go quietly. But Marcus, these were not criminals or pirates. These were trained operatives, and I think I know who sent them. She did not need to say the name. The Shaith were the most militaristic of the 3 elder species, a proud warrior culture that had built its entire identity around strength and dominance, and the belief that power was earned through force. If the Valesi response was legal pressure, and the Torogen response was diplomatic manipulation, the Shaith response was going to be direct. Vessel confirmed it 3 hours later. I am detecting a fleet formation assembling at the edge of this system, it said. 47 vessels, Shaith military configuration, including 4 capital-class warships. Marcus closed his eyes. How long before they arrive? 16 hours at current speed. He opened his eyes and looked at Sothka, who was already checking her sidearm. Vissel, Marcus said, you mentioned an archive, the full Anthari legacy, the reason this ship was built. That is correct, Keeper. You said it can only be unlocked at a specific location. The cradle, Vessel said, the world where the Anthari first evolved, where they built their final and greatest structure before they ended themselves. The coordinates are stored in my navigation systems, and I have been holding them for 2 million years. How far? Marcus asked. Beyond the borders of all known civilization, Vessel said. Deep. In uncharted space. Marcus looked at the holographic display, showing 47 warships closing in. And then he looked at Sothka. And then he took a breath. Then I guess we need to leave, he said. And for the first time, Vessel's engines, silent for 2 million years, began to hum. When the engines came to life, the entire ship seemed to exhale, a deep resonant vibration that traveled through every deck and every wall, and settled into his bones like music, played at a frequency just below hearing. The ship pulled away from Orbital Depot 7 with a grace that should have been impossible for something over a kilometer long, sliding out of the docking cradle like a blade being drawn from a sheath, and the Concorde enforcement vessels scrambled to respond, but they were too slow and too stunned to do anything but watch. Marcus had expected to run alone. He was wrong. Within hours of his departure, signals began arriving from across the Kalos system. Small ships, civilian vessels, traders, and independents, and a handful of military craft from younger species worlds that had been monitoring the situation from a distance and had already made their decision. A Drexy gunship, captained by one of Sothka's cousins, was the first to fall in. Alongside the Inheritance, followed by a pair of fast corvettes crewed by Minari, a young species of six-limbed engineers who had been denied council representation for 50 years, despite having technology that rivaled the elder species. Then came a Pelian science vessel, a Kothari patrol boat, and a dozen other ships of various sizes and species, all converging on the same heading, all answering the same unspoken call. But the biggest surprise came from inside the Concorde itself. Unidentified vessel, this is Captain Enara Dish of the Concorde enforcement ship Resolute, and I am breaking formation to join your convoy. The transmission arrived on an open channel, which meant every ship in the system heard it, which meant Enara Dish knew exactly what she was doing. She was burning her career, and her rank, and her standing in Velesi society, in full public view. Marcus opened a channel to her. "Captain, are you sure about this?" he asked. "Have served the Concorde for 90 years, Enara said, and her voice was calm, in the way that only comes from having already made peace with a decision. "And I have always believed that the Concorde existed to serve all species equally, but I have watched the Council suppress information and threaten a civilian, and prepare military force to protect a hierarchy that I now believe was never meant to exist. So yes, I am sure." She brought her ship, a mid-sized enforcement cruiser with real weapons and real armor, into formation beside the Inheritance, and her presence gave the ragtag fleet something it had not had before: legitimacy. They were not rebels or pirates. They were citizens of the Concorde, exercising their right to seek the truth. The fleet made 3 jumps through map space before they hit the border. The edge of known civilization was not a wall or a line, but a gradual thinning, a place where the star maps went from detailed to sparse to blank. The relay station stopped, and the navigation beacons went dark, and the only thing ahead was the unknown. The Shaith fleet caught them there. War Commander Osrek brought 47 ships out of hyperspace in a wall of metal and fire that stretched across the void like a clenched fist. Capital warships, flanked by destroyers and interceptors, every weapon system powered and every shield raised. Osrek himself appeared on the comm channel, a broad and scarred Shaith with a voice like gravel being crushed, wearing the ceremonial armor of a fleet commander who had seen more battles than most species had seen generations. "Human," he said, and the word was not an insult, but it was not friendly either. "I am going to speak plainly because I respect you enough to not waste your time with politics." "I appreciate that," Marcus said. "I do not care about the Council's laws or the hierarchy, or who sits in what chair on Thesson Prime," Osrek said. "Is the survival of every civilization in this galaxy. And what you are carrying on that ship has the power to tear everything apart. Or bring everything together," Marcus said. "That is what frightens me," Osrek said, and there was something raw in his voice that Marcus had not expected. "Every great change in history has been paid for in blood, and I have seen enough blood to last me forever, and I will not stand aside and let you unleash something that could ignite a war across 1,000 worlds." "Commander, I am not trying to start a war," Marcus said. "Then surrender the vessel and let us contain this," Osrek said. "Not destroy it, contain it." Study it. Release it slowly over decades in a way that does not shatter everything at once. Marcus understood Osric's fear, and he respected it, because the war commander was not a villain. He was a soldier who had spent his life protecting people, and who saw in this moment the possibility of everything he had protected falling apart. But Marcus also knew that the truth does not become less true because you release it slowly, and that controlling information is just another word for controlling people, and that 2 million years was long enough to wait. I cannot do that, Marcus said, and I think you know I cannot. Osric closed the channel, and the Shaith fleet opened fire. The battle that followed was the most terrifying and beautiful thing Marcus had ever witnessed. The ragtag fleet scattered into defensive positions, and Aradish's resolute leading the charge with a ferocity that surprised even the Shaith. And the younger species ships fought with a desperation born not from aggression, but from the understanding that this was the moment where everything changed or nothing did. But it was the inheritance that turned the tide. Vessel-activated weapon systems that had been dormant for 2 million years, and the technology gap between Anthari engineering and modern Concord military hardware was not a gap, it was an abyss. Beams of light that bent around obstacles and passed through shields like they did not exist. Gravity pulses that pushed capital ships sideways without damaging them. Energy fields that wrapped around incoming missiles and simply unmade them into harmless particles. Marcus did not want to destroy the Shaith fleet, and he told Vessel so, and the ship listened. Every weapon it fired was precise, surgical, designed to disable rather than kill. Engines knocked offline, weapons arrays overloaded and shut down, navigation systems scrambled, but not a single hull breached, not a single crew compartment depressurized, not a single life taken. The Shaith had never encountered anything like it, and Marcus could hear the confusion and fear in their communications as ship after ship went dark, but alive. During the battle, as Marcus gripped the console and watched the chaos unfold through Vessel's display, the ship told him one more piece of the Anthari story. The Anthari did not die, Vessel said, its voice somehow calm, even as it coordinated 100 simultaneous defensive actions. They did not ascend to a higher plane or flee to another galaxy. They chose to end themselves. Why? Marcus asked. Because they understood that a single dominant species, no matter how wise or benevolent, will always become a cage for everything beneath it, Vessel said. They looked at what they had built, a galaxy full of potential, full of life they had lovingly designed. And they realized that as long as they existed, every other species would be living in their shadow, defined by their design, dependent on their guidance. So they stepped aside, Marcus said. They removed themselves entirely, Vessel said. They destroyed their cities, erased their presence from every world they had touched, and left behind only this ship and the cradle, found when the time was right. Marcus felt something break open inside him, a grief for a species he had never known, a people who had loved the galaxy so much that they had given it the only gift that mattered, the freedom to become whatever it wanted to be. And in that moment, standing on the bridge of a ship built by beings who had sacrificed everything for the future, Marcus made a decision. Vessel, he said, broadcast the Anthari historical records on every frequency you can reach, every ship, every station, every world, everything you have. Hold nothing back. Keeper, once this information is released, it cannot be contained. I know, Marcus said. That is the point. Vessel broadcast. The signal went out like a wave of light, carrying the Anthari's story, their creation, their seeding of the galaxy, their sacrifice, the purpose they had given to every species. And it washed over the battlefield and beyond it, reaching relay stations and comm networks and spreading at the speed of light toward every corner of civilization. The Shaith fleet went silent. Marcus watched Osric's flagship drift to a stop, its weapons powering down, and he imagined the war commander sitting in his command chair, receiving the same transmission that every being in the galaxy was now receiving. The truth about where they all came from and why. Some of the Sheikh's ships stood down immediately, their captains unable to fight against something that had just given them the deepest answer their species had ever sought. Others held their positions, uncertain and afraid. In the gap that opened, Marcus and his fleet jumped to the final coordinates. And when they emerged from hyperspace, Marcus looked through Vessel's display and forgot how to breathe. It was not a planet. It was a structure so vast that it made the inheritance look like a grain of sand beside a mountain. The void in every direction, dark and silent and impossibly ancient, a web of interconnected rings and spheres and bridges that dwarfed anything any civilization had ever built. The cradle. And as the inheritance approached, the structure began to light up, section by section, ring by ring, a cascade of illumination spreading across something the size of a solar system, as if the greatest creation in the history of the galaxy had been holding its breath for 2 million years, and had just exhaled. Not alive in the way that animals or plants are alive, but alive in the way that a cathedral is alive, when light pours through its windows and fills the silence with color. It was alive with purpose, with meaning, with the accumulated intention of a civilization that had poured everything it was into one final act of generosity. Marcus guided the inheritance through the outer rings of the structure, following a path that Vessel traced through the holographic display like a thread through a labyrinth. And every surface they passed glowed with the same soft blue-white light that had greeted him when he first stepped aboard the ship. The structure's scale was beyond comprehension. Entire sections were larger than planets, connected by bridges that spanned distances measured in millions of kilometers. And through the transparent walls of the passage corridors, Marcus could see chambers that contained what looked like miniature suns held in suspension, and forests, crystalline towers that reached upward into artificial skies, and vast libraries where data conduits pulsed with light in patterns so complex they looked like galaxies. "What is all of this?" Sothka whispered from beside him, her reptilian eyes wider than Marcus had ever seen them. "Everything," Vessel said. "The complete knowledge of the Anthari civilization, their science, their art, their philosophy, their history, their music, their mathematics, their understanding of life and death in the universe, stored and preserved and waiting to be given away." Marcus docked the inheritance at the structure's core, a spherical chamber at the very center of the cradle that was so perfectly still and so perfectly silent that it felt like standing inside a held breath. At the center of the chamber was a single platform, raised slightly above the floor, ringed with the same crystalline conduits that lined the ship's corridors. Vessel spoke softly. "Keeper, when you step onto that platform and interface with the central archive, the cradle will begin its primary function." "Which is what exactly?" Marcus asked. "Transmission," Vessel said. "The cradle was designed to broadcast the Anthari legacy to every world in the galaxy simultaneously, but not as a single undifferentiated signal. Each species will receive a targeted data stream, encoded in their own language, structured to match their own cognitive patterns, containing the specific knowledge they were designed to contribute to and benefit from." Marcus stood at the edge of the platform and looked at it for a long time. He thought about his apartment on Kalos 9 that he probably could not afford anymore, and about the 800 credits he had spent on an auction that no one else attended, and about the fact that he was a mechanic and a salvage dealer, and not a hero or a prophet or a leader. He thought about how absurd it was that the most important moment in history was going to come. The history of the galaxy was about to happen because one guy needed red money. Then he stepped onto the platform. The light hit him like a wave. It surged up through the floor and into his body and out through the top of his head. And in that moment, Marcus felt everything. Not just the Anthari's knowledge, but their intention, their love, their desperate hope that someday someone would stand exactly where he was standing and do exactly what he was doing. The cradle awoke. It happened all at once, a pulse of energy that radiated outward from the core, through every ring and every bridge and every chamber of the structure, and then beyond it, out into the void, accelerating to speeds that should not have been possible. A wave of information that crossed the galaxy not in years or centuries, but in moments. On 1,000 worlds, on 10,000 worlds, beings of every species looked up as their communication systems activated without warning and began receiving data. The Valesi received political and organizational frameworks so elegant and so fair that their greatest scholars wept. Systems of governance that balanced individual freedom with collective responsibility in ways they had spent millennia trying to achieve. The Taurogan received ecological and environmental knowledge that revealed the deep connections between all living systems, patterns and principles that would allow them to heal damaged worlds and nurture new ones with a precision they had only dreamed of. The Shaith received strategic and protective doctrines not of conquest, but of guardianship, methods for defending life and civilization against threats both internal and external, a warrior philosophy that honored strength while directing it toward preservation rather than domination. The Drexi received biological and medical knowledge that could end diseases their species had suffered from for generations, insights into genetic repair, cellular regeneration that Sothka's people had been searching for since they first developed science. Every species received something specific, something tailored, something they needed. And humanity received the integration framework. It was not a weapon or a crown or a throne. It was a lens, a way of seeing how all the pieces fit together, an understanding of connection that allowed humans to look at the knowledge given to every other species and see the patterns that linked them all. Marcus felt it settle into his mind like a key turning in a lock, and suddenly he could see it. The way the Valesi gift of governance connected to the Taurogan gift of ecological thinking, the way the Shath gift of protection supported the Minari gift of engineering, the way every piece was part of a design so vast and so beautiful that no single species could have conceived it alone. Humans were not given superiority, they were given responsibility. Had chosen humanity as the capstone, not because humans were the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but because of one trait that the Anthari had valued above every other quality in the universe: stubbornness. The irrational, defiant, beautiful refusal to accept that something is impossible. The Anthari had studied the species they created across millions of years of observation, and they had seen that humans possess something unique, a capacity for dreaming beyond their reach, for attempting things that logic said could not be done, for persisting in the face of evidence that they should stop. The Anthari believed that only a species like that would actually make the journey to the cradle, because every other species would have calculated the odds and decided it was not worth the risk. But humans would do it anyway, not because they were certain of success, but because they could not bear the thought of not trying. Inheritance, not power, but the willingness to carry the weight. Marcus opened his eyes, and the light was still flowing, and the cradle was still transmitting. And somewhere behind him, Sothka was saying his name. But he could not answer yet, because he was still holding all of it. The grief of the Anthari, and the hope of the Anthari, and the love of the Anthari, for a galaxy they would never see completed. Then the alarm sounded. Vessel's voice cut through the light. "Keeper, the Shaith fleet has arrived at the cradle." 47 warships emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the structure, and War Commander Osrek's flagship moved to the front of the formation, weapons charged, shields raised, bearing down on the core with the full weight of a military designed for exactly this kind of decisive action. Marcus stepped off the platform, and the light receded, but the knowledge remained. and he walked to the bridge of the inheritance with steady legs and a clear mind. He opened a channel to Osrek. "Commander," he said. There was a long silence, and when Osrek spoke, his voice was different. Not the gravel-hard tone of a warrior preparing for battle, but something quieter. Something that sounded like a man standing at the edge of everything he had ever believed, and watching it reshape itself. "I received the transmission," Osrek said. "My entire fleet received it, and I have spent the last hour reading what the Anthari left for the Shaith, and I do not know what to do with it." "You do not have to do anything with it right now," Marcus said. "I came here to destroy this structure," Osrek said. "I know. I believed it was the right thing to do. I believed that the galaxy was not ready for this, that the chaos it would cause would destroy more than it would save." "You were right," Marcus said, and Osrek fell silent in surprise. "The galaxy is not ready, and it never will be, and that is the entire point. You do not wait until everything is perfect to do what is right, because perfection never comes. You just do it, and you deal with the mess, and you make it work, because that is what living things do." Another long silence. "My species was given a gift," Osrek said slowly. "A gift that tells us our purpose is to protect, not to control." "Yes," Marcus said. "And you are asking me to start doing that right now, even though everything in my training tells me that the safest course of action is to destroy this place and contain the information." "I am not asking you anything, Commander," Marcus said. "I am telling you that the information is already out there. It has already reached every world in the galaxy, and destroying the cradle will not change that. And the only question left is whether you want to be part of what comes next, or whether you want to be the one who tried to stop it." The Shath fleet held its position for 11 minutes. Then, one by one, the weapon systems powered down. Osrek's flagship lowered its shields. "I will need time," Osrek said. "We all will," Marcus said. 6 months later, the galaxy was a different place. Not a better place, not yet. Different in the way that a house is different after you have torn down a wall and found a room you never knew existed. Messy and full of dust, and uncertain, but also full of possibility. The old hierarchy was collapsing, slowly and loudly, and with all the grace of a building falling down a hill, and the elder species were struggling to adjust to a reality in which their authority was no longer assumed, but had to be earned. The Concord still existed, but it was being rebuilt from the ground up, reshaped by the knowledge the cradle had given every species, restructured around the understanding that each civilization had a unique and essential role to play, and that no one species could or should lead alone. Humanity found itself at the center of this new order, not as rulers or commanders, but as connectors, the ones who sat at every table and helped translate between species, not just in language, but in purpose, helping the Valesi understand why the Shaith needed to protect, helping the Taragan understand why the Minari needed to build, helping everyone see the threads that linked their gifts together. It was exhausting and messy and frequently ridiculous work, and Marcus was terrible at the political parts, and only slightly better at the diplomatic parts, but he kept showing up because that was what humans did. They named him the first steward of the cradle, a title he accepted with the same enthusiasm he had once reserved for filing tax forms. Sothka visited him at the cradle every few weeks, bringing supplies and news, and the particular kind of blunt honesty that only a true friend can deliver. "You know you are technically the most important human alive," she told him once, sitting on the bridge of the inheritance while the structure hummed around them like a living thing. "I am a guy who went to an auction because he needed rent money," Marcus said. "And now you are responsible for the future of galactic civilization." "I am aware of the irony." Sothka made the low rumbling sound that Drexy used when something was funny but also true. "The Anthari spent 2 million years designing a plan to unite the galaxy," she said, "and the whole thing depended on someone being too stubborn to know they should have stayed home." Marcus looked out at the stars through the bridge display, at the vast and luminous structure that surrounded them. at the galaxy that was stumbling and arguing and slowly learning to see itself as one connected whole. "Yeah," he said. "Sounds about human." The galaxy had spent 2 million years waiting for someone too stubborn to know they should have stayed. Home? In the end, that was enough.